Hello and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today I'm going to be doing an ad hoc video of, well, it's another part of my How I Work series, and I'll be talking about not tools but more of processes. So one thing that I've kind of like realized as I'm getting more and more into my career is that sometimes the tools and technologies matter less than the actual processes and the human aspect of development. So like having a really good team with bad technology is better than having a bad team with good technology. At least that's kind of my view. I wanted to kind of introduce this planning process because I do have I feel like it's I don't want to say unique, but I found the planning process that works really well for me and that I like to do. So I wanted to kind of like do an ad hoc planning session of what I call the F notes. The ephemeral notes, which is a project I've been working on for fun. And it's a project where, well, it's a note-taking app, and I figure that's a pretty good place to start. Now, my screen is a little bit cut off because I'm trying out something new with my resolution. Let's try this out a little bit. So, this method of planning is kind of like a hybrid between, I want to say, task-type planning and like user story planning, which is like two different types of planning that people do. And obviously there's the third type of planning, which is no planning at all. Now I want to preface there. I feel like there's a lot of preface things that I need to talk about, but generally speaking, you know, different styles of planning work for different people. Different styles of planning work for different teams. And what I think is actually important is instead of subscribing to one planning type or whatever, is to get feedback from developers, get feedback from managers, get feedback from people after planning is done, after a project is done, to see, hey, what could we improve? What was good? What was bad? What needs to go? Essentially, and I think that's actually important during any type of process at all. So today, I'm going to be working on F notes. F notes is this idea of like having notes that they save in local storage. They're like low weight notes that you might save. I don't know, maybe you have a recipe that you want to cook later tonight, and I'm going to go to my personal account and I have recipes over here, and I'm like, okay, well, I want to I want to make a pound cake, and I have this cool little recipe over here. I'm just going to go ahead and save it here. I'm going to say, okay, well, pound cake, and that's cool. And now I have a little note, and I need to do something else actually, and I'm noticing bugs with this application. That's great, and whatever. I need to do some planning, right? So I could probably save my planning stuff in here too if I wanted to. But the idea is that if all your notes get wiped away, it's totally fine. And I like that idea, and I've been using Notepad++ for years this way for planning because it had these drafts, and the drafts would autosave when you close out the app. So when I close it out and load it back up, if it all works, and again, buggy, it doesn't work. I started refactoring it, and I didn't write tests. This is what I get. So that's one of those things. Let's say I want to bring up a new feature. So one thing I want to maybe do is archiving notes. This is literally on the spot. I want to be able to have a semi-permanent storage of notes that I might not want to access immediately. So the first thing I do when writing out and planning out features is to write down the goals of that feature. Usually that's like a second subheading. So we'll see. So we want to be able to archive a note, which means that we don't want to delete it. So the goal is to have, let's say, notes that don't show up in tabs. And we will have a list of notes. We can display a list, display list of notes, list of archive notes, and we'll have, let's say, a button to archive a note, and we probably want to have a button to unarchive a note. Now, if you look at this, it's pretty easy to see, like, you could write user stories. A user can click on a button, and the note will disappear. A user can click on a button, and a list of notes shows up. A user will click on a button and they can unarchive a note, and user will not see archived notes in the tabs. And you could do that. And the thing is that that's actually a really awesome initial approach. So we're going to go ahead and do that. We'll start with the story, or we'll start with the planning here. Now I know my keyboard is loud, but I'm not gonna get rid of that noise just because of the fact that like I am actually writing this live. So we'll go ahead and start with this. We'll have a list of archive notes, and this is where like things get a little bit tricky. What does that look like? Where would that list be? How would it even show up? Would it be a separate view? Would it show up in line somewhere? I'm going to go ahead and do this and just say that, hey, there's going to be a tab next to new note, new task list that opens a list of notes. So what I'm going to want to do is I have these little two helpers that create notes. What I'm going to want to plan out is that there's going to be a third helper that when you click it, it shows up as like almost like a regular notes tab, but this tab will have a list of archived notes. Next to new, okay, list of notes. We're going to do that. We're going to say that new tab will have a list of notes. Each note will have an Unarchive button, and we're going to leave it at that for now. Then we have a button to archive. Let's see. Do we want to archive outright? Maybe we want to archive outright, that you don't actually delete a note, it just archives it. That is actually a cool idea that we could do. We could do where when you click delete, it'll ask you, do you want to delete or do you want to archive? That's another option. That's a modal. So you kind of get when you plan this way, you start to get into the more product aspect of it, but you also get into the more technical aspect of this idea. Maybe what we can do is, I feel like archived notes are going to be special type of notes. How could we add a special action to a note so that the user can use it, but they're not encouraged to use it all the time? Like, we don't want to replace the trash icon with archive. These are supposed to be ephemeral notes. You should not be relying on saving these. And maybe this would be a question for a product manager at this point. So planning this way already gives us a little bit of, a little bit of prompting to talk to other people. So we're going to have a button to archive note. We can have that button. I really don't know. Maybe if you do an edit instead of save, there can be like an archive. Yeah, why don't we do that? When clicking on edit, an archive icon will show up next to the save button. That's a great idea. When clicked, the tab will immediately disappear, and then we'll have next tab will be selected. Next tab be selected. Yeah, there we go. So okay, we're getting a little bit there. A button to unarchive. List of archived notes will have a button on archive prior to the note title. We'll do. And the last one was, okay, yeah, notes that don't show up. Okay, so notes don't show up in tabs. So this is kind of like the user story approach of like how the product functions, and I think that's a great approach to start with. And now we can get into the more technical aspect of planning. I think one thing that user-centric planning forgets, or I guess like does not take into account, is architecture. Is the whole wealth of features that might be affected by this feature, and a whole host of other things. So in this case, we're going to go ahead and start doing the technical aspect of the planning. Notes don't show up in tabs. I'm going to go ahead and say that each note will have a. Do we want to do? My background changed and now I look different. Hold on. I'm still recording, right? Why is the background not changing? I feel like that's actually like a weird thing that takes up some processing power, is to like render the background. It's weird. Okay, so each node is actually an object in Code Sandbox, and that object gets serialized into your local storage. So if we look at, let me just, how do I close this? Can I close that I can't close it. Why is it not showing up on the right? I don't know. Anyway, so this is what a note looks like. If you can, I'm going to go ahead and zoom in a little bit. So this is what a note looks like. So I'm thinking, should there be an active flag so that each note is by default active, or should there be an archive flag so that each note is by default, an active flag so that by default each note will have to show an active flag in order to show up, or an archive flag to show that it's archived. And I think I'm going to go with archive flag. The reason being is that it's a little bit backward compatible. So if there are users, like obviously there are different ways of going about this, but if there are users that, let's see, that have already been using the application, if they load it up again and they're missing the active flag, it'll break. Of course, we can write some in-between code, so that's an option as well. How do we want to deal with this? I changed my mind. I'm going to make a status flag, and here's more technical stuff. If no status, sets status to active. So we're gonna, I'm thinking more of like X state, which does like, instead of doing loading is true or loading is false, we have the actual state that we're looking for. And then we'll have if status is archived, okay, there we go. It's going to be a separate thing. If don't show in tabs. Okay, so we have that. So that's pretty cool. We can start adding these technical aspects to everything else. A tab, we'll open up that. Okay, so we'll do this. A list of notes. Let's see. A list of notes filtered by status equals archived. So we can do that. And then we'll have to have tab should always show up. Like this is not a the tab should always show up. This is not like this is not a new node or anything like that. But the tab button, I'm gonna say tab button should always show up. Let me look at the technical implementation so far. It is a template. We have text editor. We just have we have this here. Is there anything that we need to keep in mind? Maybe here's the thing. So if I do make it a new tab and it shows us something completely different, we currently have this, that if the current node is active, we display it. So this, again, we're finding like technical issues that we need to take into account. I really wish this editor would work a little bit differently. Toggle preview? Split editor? I don't want to split it. Oh, nice. Okay. Well, this is what I wanted. I also want to still get rid of the sidebar. Appearance, toggle Zen mode. Well, that's not very Zen. Okay. So the technical implementation right now depends on a current node being set. Is there a way we can figure this out? So what we need to do is new tab will have a list of nodes. We're going to have to go ahead and say that add a special category of built-in tabs. If current node is null, don't show. If current node is null and current special tab is not null, don't display notes. Don't display node contents. And there we go. Cool. And then we still have if current node is null and so is. Well, that's great. I'm just gonna have barking in my background, and might as well like say bye to the whole video at this point, right? No, I'm just gonna still upload this and somebody's gonna complain about it. If you're complaining about it, don't even leave a note. I already know. So if current node is null and so is current special node tab, default current node to the first node. So that's something to keep in mind. We will have to I'll have to create a brand new special category of displayed nodes. We have that right here, the node's current node. I mean, we're gonna have to do an if here. So I mean, we already have an if, we're probably going to have to do another if, which is going to be like special tabs and displaying it. So again, this helps me a little bit being able to dig deep into the technical aspect of planning rather than relying on the user stories, because this adds complexity that I was like, okay, wait, that's not an easy feature because I need to take down the notes. And yeah, so each note should have, okay, well, that's fine. That's actually not a big deal. I don't think there's any, well, I'm just going to say unarchive. There needs to be unarchive action. There needs to be unarchive action. It needs to trigger autosave. So I'm using Svelte. This is a big component, obviously, but I have this weird, okay, run effect. Don't judge me. This is my first time, like not a first time, but I'm writing some Svelte. I'm learning it. It's obviously not perfect, but I have this run effect function, and this is what saves my nodes into local storage, and obviously that doesn't work exactly perfectly well. I'm still working on it. I'm still fixing it. But yeah, so it needs to definitely save. So when you unarchive something, the whole point of this app is that everything autosaves immediately. I mean, obviously, other than like, once you click save, it's saved. Once I type something in, once I type something in, it should be saved. Once I add a new node, it should actually switch to that new node and save. And once I add a task list, it should autosave as well. And deleting, same thing. So unarchiving, we need to make sure that that will always trigger on autosave. Cool. This actually lets us know what we need to test and what we need to do. Now, this looks a little bit confusing in Markdown. Let's see if I can, yeah, there we go. I typically used to use org mode for my planning, which meant that, most of my file would kind of look like this, where I'm like, okay, well, that's the top level task, and no fault found. Yeah, that's great. That's the top level task, and everything inside of it is like details that we need to know for later. Cool. It's going to be a 30-minute video of just like me going through a single file here. So it says when clicking edit, an archive icon will show up next to the save button. There is like no extra information that needs to happen here. When it clicked, tab will immediately disappear. Next tab will be selected. We just need to make sure, ensure that note tab will get autosaved. That's one thing that we just need to keep in mind. There's nothing really else that we need to know, I think. So we're actually good on this one. A button to unarchive, list of, yeah, that's the same thing actually as up here. So I can actually delete this. All right. And then lastly, notes don't show up in tabs. Again, this is all good. So we've got a pretty good plan here. We could rewrite this as stories, which I'm sometimes required to, so that I have something that I can put into Jira or Pivotal Tracker. Those are the two project management suites that I've really used and liked. I think Jira... okay. I know, Jira. The modern Jira can be set up in a really, really fantastic way. Modern Jira is kind of like Trello with actual project management built in, where you can assign people and assign epics and kind of go through and do all kinds of stuff like that. So this is great. So I'm going to go ahead and do this. I'm going to say, this is not something I write here, but I'm going to say epic name, and we're going to call this archive notes. And then we're going to go ahead and start adding the stories. And we have a story of, display, archive tab. Sometimes I would actually look into like which icon to use, but I don't want to do that right now. I think that's actually okay. Next to new note tasks, we're going to do that. We're going to do display notes as tabs only if status equals archived. Handle legacy notes by setting status equals to active on load and autosave. That shouldn't be a big deal actually, because in the way that this works with Svelte, it listens in on the actual notes. So if I change and modify the notes object, it should auto save it. So we should be fine there. We'll say a tab button should always show up. That's fine. New tab will have a list of notes. Display archived notes contents. This is where I'm starting to realize that tab is not like a good moniker. Like tab is basically just a button up top, but I also use it to explain the contents. So I'm gonna say display archive notes in tab contents. That's fine. We have built-in tabs. We'll have okay. So before that, we'll have let's see. Create special tab. Create special tab. How do I even say this? I have a new tab. We'll have a list of notes. Add a special. Okay. Create special. Category section on the page. Handle current note. Handle unselected current note, but selected special tab. Display archive notes. And there we go. Display unarchived notes. Unarchive. Display archive notes and tabs. Just title. I'm gonna list of archived notes, titles in tab contents when archived notes special tab is selected. Okay, so that we're getting a little bit into being verbose about this. Display on archive. Action next to note titles in archived notes special tab. And we can kind of keep going with this. I think I'm gonna like stop here for now. You can kind of see that like I can keep going with this. I can say, I think at some point I can say that store note status in status flag on note object. Allow only active or archived. So like we're getting there. We're getting there with everything else. I just realized that we'll go ahead and do this. New notes have active flag, or is it status set to active. Yeah, there we go. Hopefully it's just kind of useful. It's half an hour of just like me planning random crap, but this is kind of like how I think about projects, and I find myself frustrated sometimes when there is a lack of planning. I think people like to jump in, and once they jump in, there are things they don't realize, like, you know, this, for example, this like migrating legacy notes, handling new notes. I feel like the hey, new nodes don't have a status set to active could be easily a bug that shows up, and I've seen stuff like that happen. I've seen people like, you know, assume that it's just going to do a flag, and then some other engineer comes in and they're like, hey, wouldn't it be better if we had a status? Because then if you have a status, you can do active, archived, and you can even do deleted and have a trash can. You could do pinned. Like, what if the status is pinned? That means it show up all the way on the left of the, wait, I'm trying to show in the window, all the way on the left of the active or the tabs bar. So I find it really important and interesting to plan out features, even if this is like a small, I would say anything that takes more than a couple days should have a certain amount of planning going into it. What's cool is that, so I've been doing this for years, and it's pretty easy to just like look at these stories, and if you want to like point those stories, I would say that every single story should just be 1 point, unless there's like an unknown, like, hey, we need to research this and this. Okay, well then give it like 2-3 points, whatever. But generally speaking, you can just give each one of these 1 point, and no matter what your scale is, or not no matter what your scale is, but I always assume that 1 point is what a developer can do in a single day. When I say that, you might be thinking, wait a second, adding a button in the tabs, how does that take one day? Okay, well, you can add it, that's fine. You're probably gonna have to add tests, right? So we gotta do that. It probably needs like an active state, that's fine. You have to find an icon, maybe talk to a designer, maybe talk to the product manager about it. Then one point goes from start to finish. And I find that on average, this is what people are able to do, is get one task done. If you get 50 of these tasks done in a day, fantastic. It's probably going to take you a week before you deploy it. And so then you're like 10 points a day. That's fine. And that works too. And on smaller features and obviously like greenfield projects, it takes less time. But I always like to assume that a person can do 1 point per day. That being said, it means 5 tasks per week, from the beginning to testing to QA to deployment in a single week. And that's what I would expect here if I was working like a full-time job on this. Obviously, this would be stored on the back end, so there might be some other things to it. This also assumes the fact that like you might have to do some refactoring. If I have the status flag, I might need to add it somewhere. I might need to listen for it somewhere. I might need to, right, like I said, new nodes have to have the active task, right? Like, so I would have to do it here, that status is active, and so on. And then you have to get somebody to review your code and approve it. So like all of that goes into single point a day. And this system works pretty well because then you just add up the number of items here, and like, you know, what is this? This is 8 lines, so I would just say, okay, well, actually, we can get to the last part of the planning. So we've tackled goals, we've tackled regular planning, technical planning, users planning, stories, and now we can tackle estimation. So, yeah, I think this is a pretty good overview. So as far as estimation, I usually do this, like I said, 1 point per day per developer. This is from start to testing, to QA, to finish. Testing, to PR review. And suddenly when you look at this list of things that need to happen for that 1 point to be considered completely done, it's enough for you to think, okay, wait, that's actually not that easy. If you get 5 of these done in a day, you might get some like some response. The next day, you might be, changing stuff on your pull request, getting it reapproved. You're still having to do testing, maybe end-to-end or integration testing. Then I'll go into QA. QA might find something and throw it back to you. If they don't find anything, you still have to wait for the deployment, and all of a sudden the whole week is already gone. And even though you've started on stuff for the next week, it's still 5 points that you're getting done that week. I also like to do multiply final result by 1.5x. That's another trick. There's this whole thing, I think it was an XKCD comic that said, hey, you should be doubling your estimate for every level of a person that needs to have a consideration. So as a senior developer, I think 1.5, that's all I need to do. But if you're like a junior developer, you might need to do 1.5 per level, right? Because it's really easy for features to get derailed. You might need to do bug fixes unrelated to the feature during your week. You might need to do all kinds of things. You might need to wait for feedback. So 1 point per day is an ideal scale. 1.5 times is what I would consider like a realistic scale. And then I just do all the multiplication. So I have 8 stories times 1 point, because I'm just a single developer working on this, times 1.5, and that is equal to what, for 12 work days. So that's about 2 weeks to get this done. Ooh, that sounds pretty yucky. You might be thinking, hey, why does it take you so long? I mean, it's a test project, but imagine if you're working on a much larger project, this might require a little bit more orchestration. But I think that this is a pretty accurate estimation. Again, this is how I like to plan out my own projects. I planned out projects that work this way. I would say that it's also important to get another developer to review your planning. It's kind of like almost like a PR review, but it's important to just like talk them through your what thinking process led you to make the decisions that you're making. Perhaps like, hey, why is this a status flag? Well, let me tell you about this idea about delete it. Let me tell you about this. And what's cool is that a lot of times, especially in larger organizations, the other developer might have some insight or knowledge that you might not have. So maybe I have the insight and knowledge about that, hey, at some point we want to have a trashed notes section, which is why the status is so important. And, developer comes in, I explain it, and they're like, oh yeah, you know what? I actually heard about this feature where we might want to have notes that sync between different accounts. So maybe I'm sharing my note. And in that case, it would be great to have a status that's either shared or maybe a status that's processing, because it's still like processing and working with something else. And you're like, I had no idea about it. So it's when you have people like that, like when you're able to do things like that, where you spend half an hour or an hour planning this, or maybe on larger projects, there have been literally like a week of planning. That week of planning saved, I would say, like weeks of actual work doing that. Because during that week of planning, you can realize how big of a project it is. You can cut down on scope. You can find bugs before they happen. Like seriously, this thing about migrating. Legacy notes. That's not something I realized at the beginning of this video. At least I don't think I did. And this is all just off the top of my head. This is not even a feature that I was planning at any point. So when you're able to do that, you plan it out, you get somebody else to review it. When you get somebody else to review it, they can, again, point out things that you might not have thought of. It's great to get a variety of people to review your work. What I mean by that is that don't just pick the same exact developer to review your plans. It's important to like move things around. At an old job, we had this system that I pushed to call the Xena Gabrielle system. If you're a fan of the Xena the Warrior Princess, that's what I'm talking about. She had a quote-unquote sidekick, Gabrielle, but she was not really a sidekick, even though I think she was referred to as such by one of the other characters, Joxer. And what was cool about the duo of Xena and Gabrielle was that they came from completely different worlds. Xena came from a very fight is all there is. I'm trying to, get some kind of absolution for my sins, so to speak. I am used to people betraying me. I'm used to having to fight. I'm used to all these different things. And she has a very skewed sense of justice because she feels like she's at fault for everything. Because she did so much damage or whatever. I could go into a whole thing about the story. But then Gabrielle balanced it out because she had almost like a naive, innocent view on the world, and that obviously changed throughout the series, but she always had a slightly different view on the world than Xena, and it balanced them out really well so that any conflict they got into, they were both very important. Obviously, Xena could kick ass, but then you had Gabrielle who's like, hey, maybe we shouldn't kick ass and we should talk to them instead. Or Xena would be like, hey, we need to talk to them, and Gabrielle would be like, hey, I know you're trying to go along with them and talk to them and stuff, but this is an unfair situation, and you can't put yourself in an unfair situation just because you feel bad about yourself. And so, God, I got into a whole thing. So what I'm talking about here is I'm a senior developer developing this, and I want somebody to review it. Get that junior developer on your team to review your stuff. And I'm not kidding. Get them to review it and get them to ask questions. Tell them, look, I need to get honest feedback about this. What do you think about this? And just take their insight into your planning and roll with it. I used to do this planning with one of my colleagues, Brandon, and Brandon was fantastic. He just did amazing stuff with org mode, and I think he had a auto counter that could count up all the points and everything. And we would do things together, and we would review each other's work, and it was fantastic. And then after he left the workplace where we worked together, I did this, and I had different developer. I would pair with different developers on planning, and I found it so insightful and so important. Lots of talking in this video. I hope you found it useful. I feel like I could do a deep dive, maybe a talk, maybe a blog post. I might write a blog post about it. But this is how I approach just about any problem. Even if the planning is not required by my job, I do this planning either in my head or in Notepad++. My Notepad++ is filled with these notes that after I get started on the project or I'm done with the project, I just close out and delete. And that is kind of my point with F-Notes. Like F-Notes, I'm sponsored by F-Notes, which is my own product. Just kidding. But that was kind of the idea behind F-Notes anyway, was just to be able to get your thoughts out on paper and then delete it when you're done with it. Leave any kind of feedback on the bottom. I would appreciate it. Please be positive. Negative comments just really get to me. Yeah, that's part of why I don't release as many videos anymore. But yeah, please enjoy.